Hi there, welcome to this video. Today I'm going to be making a hoodie for last month's giveaway winner. This month we also have a giveaway going on, another hoodie. Next month it'll be something different though, so this is your last chance to win a hoodie for free. And I'm also redesigning it, so I won't have that pattern for that much longer. So if you want a hoodie, hit me up for it now. Otherwise, it's going to be a different model. It's not going to be the same silhouette. So let's get right into the video. I'm going to start by ironing all of my scrap material that I'm using. And I just found like 3 or 4 different hoodies and or sweatpants to cut up and use for this hoodie today. Let's get started. For ironing, you really want to be thorough and make sure that you're getting all the folds and creases that are in your pieces. That rhymed. But you just want to make sure that there aren't any issues going on with sewing, and having a little fold or crease in it can cause an issue. So this is just a preventative measure, and also just makes it a little easier to cut out your pieces. So yeah, you really want to be careful with ironing. And then I'll go in and serge pieces together to fit my pattern pieces. So this is basically just taking the old sleeves from the hoodies or sweatpants that I cut up and combining them to fit my pattern pieces. And so I'll serge them together and then do a little top stitch like that, and then iron it all out and then cut out my pattern piece. So I'm just going to show you guys this piece. I'm going to cut the rest off camera. It's just one of those tedious tasks that's not super important to showing you how it's made, because each person, how they do it, will do it differently. But I just wanted to show you how I do it and give you some inspiration for maybe some of your own projects. So here I'm sewing the first 2 panels of the hood together, and I'm just going to start serging it with a 3/8 seam allowance, and then I'll go in and top stitch both edges. And I actually like to make the middle piece about an inch longer than the side pieces, just to give a little leeway in case of stretching. And this just helps prevent any issues later on. You don't want any piece to not align, and these curves can sometimes make it tricky. So if you just try and match up both sides, it'll make it a little easier. And yeah, I'm just serging the second side together now and really going slow on those curves. You want to make sure that you're not making one piece longer than the other. You want the seam allowances to be the same. And yeah, as you see, I line it up about an inch away from the edge, and that just gives that extra little leeway. And then I'll top stitch, and this is just to keep the seams nice. It adds a little detail to it, but it's more for making the inside of the hoodie less itchy and just to make it a little nicer overall. So you see, I go in pretty close to the edge. I like to do about 1/8 of an inch top stitch from the edge of each panel. And as I said, yeah, it's just to make it a little more comfortable on the inside and give it that little detail. So here we're sewing the hood up closed. This is making it into the actual hood shape that it's going to be attached to the hoodie on. So the next thing to make is the top panels for the sleeve as well as the front pocket. I like to add a 1/4 inch top stitch away from the edge first and roll over these edges. It makes it so much easier to add to their respective piece and adds that extra little bit of detail that makes it nicer in the end. So we'll go starting with the sleeve panels, do both sides just to make it pretty even. And for this I'll leave a 3/4 inch seam allowance for the rollover. This is just the amount that I like for these rolled over edges, and that gives me plenty of extra room to roll over and not have any issues. And my end goal is for these pieces to be about 2 inches wide. Sometimes it varies around like 2 to 2 1/4, but for the most part it stays pretty uniform. As you'll notice though, sometimes on the seams it ends up being a little thicker, and that's just because of the material. There's nothing really I can do about that, but it's just one of the issues you have to be okay with. It shouldn't create any major issues though, and you can sort of iron it out and or sew it out when you attach it to the respective panel. And for the front pocket, like I'm doing here, I just wanted to create that nice even front shape and then finish off with this last sleeve panel. And as you can see here, I'm changing the thread or re-threading it through my needle. It's one of just the major problems in sewing, you never know when your thread will pop out, and it's just something you have to go with. And or breaking needles too, that's another big issue that happens a lot. Not so much with this material just because it's fairly soft and not too thick, but with denim or leather or something thicker, it can happen fairly often, and especially when you have multiple layers. So right now this is about 3 layers of sweatpant, but at max it'll be anywhere from like 5 to 6 depending on how it's matching up. Here I'm attaching the front pocket. I like to do another 1/8 inch edge stitch with my top thread. This just adds another little extra level of detail, and I use my turquoise thread for everything, as you may know. I'm just going and attaching all 3 corners of that piece. That makes it so when I sew it all together, I have that front pocket, and then I'll go and do the same thing for the sleeve panels. Again, this is just adding that little extra bit of detail and making it my own. And yeah, finishing up this last panel. As you see, there's a image underneath, and I wanted to cover it up a little bit, but I thought it was kind of cool to have the panel running through it, so you still got some of it showing up, but couldn't really read what it says. Here I'm changing my bobbin thread. Again, just one of the main things about sewing. People ask a lot, is it easy to sew? Is it just like, something you can do? And yeah, it totally is, but you got to be okay with doing the tedious tasks over and over and over again. Here we're ironing the pieces and just trimming any little threads. So I was deciding whether or not to add these red cuffs and hoodie hem, but I decided to go with a gray one that I had. This was just a design choice, but it's something that I like to show because a lot of these things are sort of just winged together, and I have my basically colors that I want and the pattern that I want, but don't necessarily know how it's going to end up looking. So a lot of times it's pretty just up in the air until I start cutting out my pieces. So here we're starting to attach everything together. So I start by adding one of the sleeve panels to the front panel. This just helps me lay out which sleeve I want on which side and make sure everything looks how I want it to. And I'll go in and do 3 of the 4 seams, and this is with the serger, and then I will top stitch them all down first before connecting the last seam. This just makes it a little easier to do the top stitching, and I will do the top stitching on all of the front panels. I don't like doing it on the sleeve because of how it lays. I try and do the top stitching on the edge of the seam that's closest to the bottom. This is just a personal preference. It makes it look like a more professional garment, in my opinion. Yeah, I'll just attach that final seam together with the serger and then go ahead and top stitch that down as well. Again, just making sure to do everything while it's easiest, and this is just for efficiency, and it'll just make it a lot less stressful sewing later on, which in my opinion is probably the most important thing about planning out how you're going to sew. This is probably the hardest seam of the hoodie. This is attaching the sleeve panel together as well as the body panels together. And I like to do this in one solid seam, like how you would sew up a pair of pants by sewing up the whole inseam together in one solid seam. And this just makes it really nice, really simple, and really easy to do besides top stitching. The top stitching, you have to do what's called sewing in the tunnel or sewing in the O or whatever other name you may have heard for it. And this is where you essentially have to sew into your pattern inside out. and that's the only way you can really do it. And since I want the top stitching to be on the same back panel on both sides, the first one will be very easy because you can start right at the bottom of the hem. But for the second one, you actually have to start at the cuff of the sleeve, and this is because you want the top stitching to be on the same side, but it's basically flipped from the other side. So they end up both being on the back panels, but you have to approach them from each different direction. So here I'm attaching the hood to the neckline, and I like to use these little sewing clips to line it all up how I want it. And how I line it up is actually starting at the back and then working both sides to the front. This way you get the back all lined up, and then the only thing you have to worry about is just making sure everything lines up flat. And I actually had to replace one of the serger threads there. It snapped, and when it snaps I like to do just a little top stitch to where it snapped to the finish of it, and this just makes it much more solid. When that thread breaks out, the serger can sometimes rip out later on. So then I'm going to go in and clean up everything, and then I'll work on top stitching the hood down. And you have to do this inside out, as you can see, but I do it on the body part of it rather than the hood. And again, that's just keeping my preference of trying to put everything top stitching wise closest to the bottom. And again, this is like sewing in the tunnel. You have to flip it inside out and sew on one of the panels. And here's the finished product. I had my friend Julio come model it for me. Check out his Instagram. He's got a little fashion page too called Human Care Required, and he does local printing in the Bay Area as well. Super cool dude. And yeah, let me know what you guys think of the hoodie. I think it came out pretty cool, and shout out Noah in Chicago, who's going to be the one receiving it. He was the winner for last month's giveaway. Also, don't forget to check out my Instagram. Here's all the details. And yeah, thank you for watching.